Some Enlightenment thinkers from both moderate Protestant and Catholic backgrounds looked to the monarchy to enforce tolerance. It's very interesting that many people may associate liberty with democracy, but many thinkers, and even amongst libertarian circles, many academics and philosophers, have actually argued that liberty and individual rights may be better preserved and better protected in a monarchy system or a strongman system where power is concentrated in the hands of one person than in a democracy. This is because, first and foremost, in a monarchy, let's say, there is an incentive for the monarch or the strongman leader to preserve the liberty of his people, because his people, his subjects, will be the ones who make up the majority of people that he rules over during his whole reign, and that his sons and his descendants will rule over. And in order to maintain his kingdom over the people, he needs the people to be happy and sort of stable in that kingdom. And the best way to do that, obviously, would be by maintaining their liberties and individual freedoms so as to make sure that they don't rebel against the monarchy or the institution of the monarchy. Because the king has an incentive to maintain his dynasty over a long period of time. Whereas in a democratic system where the president is elected every 4 years and he leaves after every 4 years, or there's a high likelihood of him leaving after every 4 years, there is not that strong of an incentive for him to maintain those liberties. In fact, that 4 year period of his rule might create a get all you can mentality from him, where he might try and violate his subjects' liberties in that 4 years to attain as much material wealth as he can, whilst he can do so. Far from being a one and for all stand on religion that promoted diversity and free speech, tolerance was simply an acknowledgement that the only way to create civil peace was to sanction opposing religious beliefs while keeping them far enough away from each other to avoid conflict. Of course, free speech fundamentally is an offshoot of tolerance, but tolerance does not necessitate free speech. So, simply tolerance in and of itself might not be enough. An active acknowledgement of diversity and people's freedom to speech and freedom of expression is also required for a society to be functional with a diversity of views. In 1651, political philosopher Thomas Hobbes published Leviathan, in which he argued that the clergy was the greatest threat to civil peace, and that in order to maintain a peaceful society, a sovereign must demonstrate absolute power over public expression. Spinoza wrote on a similar theme in his theologico-political treatise in 1670, in which he argued that the freedom to philosophize posed no danger to the state. Voltaire's Traité sur la tolérance in 1763 became the key text in the Enlightenment case for tolerance. In it, he deconstructed the current French society and argued that ancient civilizations had been much more tolerant of each other than French citizens presently were. You can see this, for example, in a lot of the ancient European societies that were pagan, where even, for example, the Romans, they, instead of trying to annihilate other pagan religions or other pagan cultures, simply assimilated them into their own. Of course, they did persecute the Christians, and without a doubt, this was a major crime and a major evil that was committed by the Romans. But that was because, according to the Romans viewed the Christians as atheists because their conception of God was so unique for their time. This idea of monotheism was so weird for that time period that the religion of Christianity wasn't understood as a religion as per how that term was understood in that time. And of course, there were issues without a doubt with many pre-modern societies, but in many ways, a lot of pre-modern societies actually did maintain the freedoms of their subjects in a much better manner than many modern societies. For example, in a lot of pre-modern societies, if you wanted to own a farm, raise some chickens, have a family, homeschool your children, and just get on with your own private life and mind your own business, the government wouldn't really interfere in your life. Of course, there were repressive social norms, and government oppression may have been more likely, and government crackdowns may have been more likely. But in general, people's private individual liberty, in many ways, was more than it is today. Because today, for example, if you want to own a farm, raise some chickens, self-teach your kids, homeschool your kids, and just get on with your life, you're still going to have to go through all kinds of governmental procedures. You're going to have to go through this extensive, overexpanded bureaucracy, fill out all this paperwork, and you may not even have the freedom to do those things at the end of that long road. In any case, a lot of previous societies may have been more tolerant in some cases. And obviously, when it comes to, let's say, Christian society, Christianity emphasized the importance of the individual and the sanctity of human life. However, unfortunately, the Christian tradition, especially when the Catholic Church began to stagnate, it fell into this kind of dogmatism and advocate for the persecution of other people. Not to simply blame the Catholic Church for this and to just be anti-Catholic for the sake of being anti-Catholic. Other religious traditions did similar things when they became stagnant, and in reality, Protestants also did the same thing when they came into power. They also persecuted Catholics. So it's not just a one-way road, but but a lot of religious traditions were, to their eyes, guilty of this kind of dogmatism and advocation of persecution. Of course, religious teachings emphasize the importance of the individual, the sanctity of the intellect and the sanctity of life, and the importance of mutual tolerance and respect, but people, due to dogmatism, end up advocating for persecution. Of course, the modern world cannot pretend to be much more enlightened or much more humane than the pre-modern world, especially with the kind of humanist political wars of religion that we've had, where people have persecuted each other for secular political matters. We can see this in the modern day, for example, when in Western countries opposing many tenets of leftism may lead to social ostracization and expelling from certain societal institutions, or perhaps in 1940s and 1930s Germany, where fascism was used to justify the killing of millions of people, especially the Jewish people, or authoritarian communist countries where millions of people were sent to die in gulags, or the ultra-nationalist civil wars of the Yugoslavia, partition and dissolution. We see that secularism and sort of these secularist ideologies in modernity are also, to their eyes, in the same kind of violence and persecution as pre-modern religious or various cultural traditions were. The reality is that in all times and places we need to emphasize the importance of free speech and freedom of expression for a society to be functional. Indeed, what must be put as the most important thing is the pursuit of truth. As Jesus Christ said, know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. Indeed, the pursuit of truth cannot be limited by institutions or dogma, and we must emphasize the need for people to go through their own spiritual journeys and for them to reach their own conclusions, but we cannot advocate for this kind of religious persecution or this secular persecution. Of course, everybody has the right to criticize each other. That's part of free speech. Everybody has the right to oppose certain ideas. That's absolutely fine. If religious people want to oppose certain things, that's absolutely fine. That's their prerogative. If, let's say, leftists or nationalists or conservatives want to oppose certain things, that's their right to do so. But it has to be done within the framework of respect for human life and intellect and the respect for people's dignity. The Quran says that there is no compulsion in religion. It also says that the truth is from your Lord, that whoever so wishes let him believe, and whoever so wishes let him disbelieve. God says that if He, in the Quran, that if He wanted to, then all the people on the earth would have believed. And He says that, will you compel the people, O Muhammad, peace be upon him, and your companions, until they become believers? Hence, every religious tradition fundamentally has these principles in place, but people end up foregoing them, unfortunately. And this leads to tyranny and an unjust society in many cases. Indeed, we must emphasize respect for each other's viewpoints and the fact that people go through different journeys and different routes in order to reach the ultimate truth or the ultimate divine purpose.